This program was made possible by a grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Christopher Plummer, and I'd like to talk to you, if I may, about one of my favorite men of letters, the late Russian author Vladimir Nabokov. Truly one of this century's great literary figures. Professor Nabokov was without doubt an original. He was unique. The English language, which was not his own, simply flowed from his pen as if he had been born its master. And he made it dance with more impish and diabolical joy than most writers of English who are native to the tongue. Apart from his searing wit and his brilliantly satirical style, he has given us some of the finest moments of rapture in modern writing. Now, we know him as the author of Lolita, Pale Fire, Speak Memory, and many another spellbinding work. But what some of us may not know is that this urbane, worldly Russian aristocrat spent a large part of his productive life in Ithaca, New York, here at Cornell University, where for over a decade he brought a teacher's gift of his memorable lectures on European and Russian literature. Cornell had given him a home far from his roots. A gift given, a gift received. Vladimir Nabokov.
Ladies and gentlemen, there are 2 million words in this course. The works to be read add up to 1 million. You are to read them, every one of them, twice. If possible, take copious notes in shorthand, every word. Type them out, sell them to your friends, and give me 3 copies. Literature was born not on the day when a boy crying wolf, wolf, came running out of the Neanderthal valley with a big gray wolf at his heels. Literature was born on the day when a boy came crying wolf, wolf, and there was no wolf behind him. So to Franz Kafka and the Metamorphosis, where a poor fellow is turned into a beetle. So what? There is no rational answer to so what. We can take the story apart, find out how the bits fit, how one part will respond to the other. But you have to have in you some cell, some gene, some germ that will vibrate in answer to sensations which you can neither define nor dismiss. Beauty plus pity is the closest we can get to a definition of art. Where there is beauty, there is pity, for the simple reason that beauty must die. Beauty always dies. The manner dies with the matter. The world dies with the individual. Now, in the Metamorphosis, there is a central figure endowed with a certain amount of human pathos among grotesque and heartless characters, figures of fun or figures of horror, asses parading as zebras, or hybrids between rabbits and rats. Franz Kafka's private nightmare was that the central human character belongs to the same private fantastic world as the inhuman characters around him. But pathetically and tragically, he attempts to struggle out of that world into the world of humans and dies in despair. Born in 1883, Franz Kafka came from a German-speaking Jewish family in Prague, Czechoslovakia. He is the greatest German writer of our time. Such poets as Rilke or such novelists as Thomas Mann are dwarves or plaster saints compared to him. He read for law at the German University in Prague, and from 1908 on, he worked as a petty clerk, a small employee in a very Gogolian office for an insurance company. Now, hardly any of his own famous works, such as The Trial or The Castle, were published during his lifetime. His greatest short story, The Metamorphosis, was written in 1915. From 1917 on, the rest of his life, a period of 7 years, was punctuated by sojourn in Central European sanatoriums. The hero of The Metamorphosis is Gregor Samsa, son of middle-class parents in Prague, Flaubertian Philistine, people only interested in the material side of life, vulgarian in their taste. Now, some years before, old Samsa had lost most of his money, whereupon his son, Gregor, took a job with one of his father's creditors and became a traveling salesman in cloth. Then his father suddenly stopped work altogether. His sister Greta was too young to work, and his mother was ill with asthma. So, young Gregor not only supported the whole family, but also found for them the apartment they are now living in. We are in Prague, Central Europe, 1912. Gregor is mostly away traveling, but when the story starts, he's spending a night at home between two business trips, and it is then that the dreadful thing happened. As Gregor Samsa awoke one morning from a troubled dream, he found himself transformed in his bed into a monstrous insect. He was lying on his hard, as it were, armor-plated back, and when he lifted his head a little, he could see his dome-like brown belly divided into corrugated segment, on top of which the bed quilt could hardly keep in position and was about to slide off completely. His numerous legs, which were pitifully thin compared to the rest of his bulk, flimmered helplessly before his eyes. What has happened to me? He thought. It was no dream. Gregor's eyes turned next to the window. One could hear raindrops beating on the tin of the windowsill's outer edge, and the dull weather made him feel quite melancholy. What about sleeping a little longer and forgetting all this nonsense, he thought. But it could not be done, for he was accustomed to sleep on his right side, and in his present condition he could not turn himself over. However violently he tried to hurl himself on his right side, he always swung back to the supine position. He had tried it at least 100 times, shutting his eyes to keep from seeing his wriggly legs, and only desisted when he began to feel in his side a faint, dull ache he had never experienced before. Now, I suggest that a man awakening on his back and finding that he has as many as 6 legs vibrating in the air, might feel that 6 was sufficient to be called numerous. Let us therefore assume that Gregor has 6 legs, that he is an insect. Next question, what kind of insect? Some commentators say a cockroach. But of course that does not make sense. A cockroach is an insect that is flat in shape and has large legs. And Gregor is anything but flat. He is convex on both sides, belly and back, and his legs are small. His approach to the cockroach is only in one regard, and that is his coloration brown, that is all. I imagine him to look something like this. He has a tremendous convex belly, which is divided into segments. Also, he has a very strong mandibles, which he uses later on to help him unlock the door of his room. He can stand erect on his hind legs. These 3 pair of legs, a strong little pair, which gives us the length of his body, which is about 3 feet long. His hard-covered back conceals a flimsy little wing cases. Curiously enough, Gregor the beetle never found out that he had wings. It's a very nice observation on my part to be treasured all your lives. Some Gregors, some Joes, some Janes don't know that they have wings. Gregor wakes up. He is alone. He has already been changed into a beetle. But his human impression still mingle with his new insect instinct. He looked at the alarm clock ticking on the chest. Good Lord, he thought. It was 6:30. And the hands were quietly moving on. It was even past the half hour. It was getting on toward 6:45. Had the alarm clock not gone off? The next train was at 7 o'clock. To catch that, he would need to hurry like mad. And his samples weren't even packed up. And he himself wasn't feeling particularly fresh and active. And even if he did catch the train, he wouldn't avoid a row with the boss, since the firm's messenger would have been waiting for the 5 o'clock train and would have long since reported his failure to turn up. He thinks of reporting that he is sick, but concludes that the insurance doctor would certify him as perfectly healthy. And would he be so far wrong on this occasion? Gregor can still speak, but his voice becomes more and more indistinct, and soon his speech cannot be understood. From Gregor's office, the chief clerk has been sent to see why he has not yet turned up at the station. The grim speed in checking a remiss employee has all the qualities of a bad dream. Observe. The chief clerk talks to Gregor from the living room on the left. His sister Greta talks to her brother from the room on the right. The mother and father join the chief clerk in the living room. Gregor cannot understand why his sister in the right-hand room does not join the others. So Gregor opens the door. Slowly, Gregor pushed the chair towards the door, then let go of it, caught hold of the door for support. The soles at the end of his little legs were somewhat sticky and rested against it for a moment after his efforts. Then he set himself to turning the key in the lock with his mouth. It seemed unhappily that he hadn't really any teeth. What could he grip the key with? But on the other hand, his jaws were certainly very strong. With their help, he did manage to set the key in motion, heedless of the fact that he was undoubtedly damaging them somewhere, since a brown fluid issued from his mouth and flowed over the key and dripped on the floor. He was still trying to carry out this difficult maneuver when he heard the chief clerk utter aloud, it sounded like a gust of wind, and now he could see the man standing as he was nearest to the door, clapping one hand before his open mouth and slowly backing away as if driven by some visible, steady pressure. Gregor tries to calm the chief clerk so that he will not be discharged. You see, sir, I'm not obstinate. I'm willing to work. Traveling is a hard life. I couldn't live without it. Where are you going, sir? To the office? Yes. Will you give a true account of all this? One can be temporarily incapacitated, but when it has been got over, one will certainly work with all the more industry and concentration. But the chief clerk, in horror, as if in a trance, is stumbling toward the staircase to escape. Gregor starts to walk toward him. There's a wonderful bit here on the hind pair of his 3 pair of legs. But immediately, as he was feeling for a support, he fell down with a little cry upon his many little legs. Hardly was he down when he experienced for the first time this morning a sense of physical comfort. His legs had firm ground under them. They were completely obedient, as he noted with joy. They even strove to carry him forward in whatever direction he chose. And he was inclined to believe that a final relief from all his suffering was at hand. The beetle begins to dominate the man. With his sister alone, he had always remained intimate. And it was a secret plan of his that she who loved music, unlike himself, and could play movingly on the violin, should be sent next year to study at the School of Music, despite the great expense that would entail. The School of Music was often mentioned in the talks he had with his sister, but always merely as a beautiful dream which could never come true. And his parents discouraged even these innocent references to it. But Gregor had made up his mind firmly about it and meant to announce the fact with due solemnity on Christmas Day. For recreation, Gregor has formed the habit of walking on the walls and the ceiling. He is at the height of the meager bliss his beetlehood can produce. His sister at once remarked the new distraction Gregor had found for himself. He left traces behind him of the sticky stuff on his soles wherever he crawled. And she got the idea in her head to give him as wide a field as possible to crawl in and of removing the pieces of furniture that hindered him. So the mother is brought in to help move the furniture. She comes to the door with exclamations of joyful eagerness to see her son. That's an incongruous reaction that is replaced by a certain hush when she enters the mysterious chamber. She catches sight of Gregor, a huge brown mass on the flowered wallpaper. And before she was really conscious that what she saw was Gregor, she screamed in a loud, hoarse voice, "Oh God, oh God!" fell with outspread arms over the couch as if giving up and did not move. "Gregor!" cried his sister, shaking her fist and glaring at him. This was the first time she had directly addressed him since his transformation. She runs into the living room for something to rouse her mother from the fainting fit. Gregor wanted to help too. He then ran after his sister into the next room as if he could advise her, as he used to do, but then had to stand helplessly behind her. Presently his father comes home and enters the living room, and so Gregor flees to the door of his own room and crouched behind it to let his father see as soon as he came in from the hall that his son had the good intention of getting back into his own room immediately, that it was not necessary to drive him there, but that if only the door were opened, he could disappear at once. And now his father starts to bombard Gregor with the only missile that the living room could provide. Apples, small red apples, and Gregor is driven back into his own room, back to the heart of his beetlehood. An apple thrown without much force grazed Gregor's back and glanced off harmlessly. But another following immediately landed right on his back and sank in. Gregor wanted to drag himself forward as if this startling, incredible pain could be left behind him, but he felt as if nailed to the spot and flattened himself out in a complete derangement of all his senses. With his last conscious look, he saw the door of his room being torn open and his mother rushing out ahead of his screaming sister. But here, Gregor's sight begins to fail. The disintegration of the Zamza family continues. They dismiss their servant girl, and engage a still cheaper charwoman, a gigantic bony creature who comes in to do the rough work. They decide to take in lodgers, and 3 bearded boarders arrive. Their beards are masks of respectability, but actually they are shoddy scoundrels, these serious-looking gentlemen. The lodgers hear Greta playing the violin in the kitchen, and in automatic reaction to the entertainment value of music, they suggest that she play for them. Gregor is attracted to the music and actually puts his head into the living room. At first, no one was aware of him. The lodgers, disappointed in the expectation of hearing good violin playing, were clustered near the window, whispering among themselves and waiting only for the music to stop. And yet, to Gregor, his sister was playing beautifully. He crawled a little farther forward and lowered his head to the ground so that it might be possible for his eyes to meet hers. He was determined to push forward till he reached his sister, to pull at her skirt and so let her know that she was to come into his room with her violin. For no one here appreciated her playing as he would appreciate it. He would never let her out of his room, at least not so long as he lived. Suddenly, one of the lodgers seized Gregor. "I beg to announce," he said, "that because of the disgusting conditions prevailing in this household and family," here he spat on the floor with emphatic brevity, "I give you notice on the spot. Naturally, I won't pay a penny for the days I have lived here. On the contrary, I shall consider bringing an action for damages against you based on claims, believe me, that will easily be susceptible of proof." Now the sister is completely unmasked. Her betrayal becomes absolute and fatal to Gregor. We must try to get rid of it, she says now explicitly to her father. It'll be the death of both of you. I can see that coming. He must go. That's the only solution. You must try to get rid of this idea that he's Gregor. The fact that we've believed it for so long is the root of all our trouble. That he has disappeared as a human brother and should now disappear as a beetle deals Gregor the last blow. Painfully, because he's so weak and maimed, he crawls back to his own room. At the doorway he turns, and his last glance falls on his mother. Hardly was he well inside the room when the door was hastily pushed shut, bolted and locked. The sudden noise in his ear startled him so much that his little legs gave beneath him. It was his sister who had shown such haste. She had been standing ready, waiting, and had made a light spring forward. Gregor had not even heard her coming, and she cried, "At last," to her parents as she turned the key in the lock. In his darkened room, Gregor discovers that he cannot move. And though he is in pain, it seems to be passing away. The rotting apple in his back and the inflamed areas around it, all covered with soft dust, already hardly troubled him. He thought of his family with tenderness and love. The decision that he must disappear was one that he held to even more strongly than his sister, if that were possible. In this state of vacant and peaceful meditation, he remained until the tower clock struck 3 in the morning. The first broadening of light in the world outside the window entered his consciousness once more. And then his head sank to the floor of its own accord. And from his nostrils came the last faint flicker of his breath. Gregor's dead, dry body is discovered the next morning by the charwoman, and a great warm sense of relief permeates the insect world of his despicable family. With Gregor's death, their insect souls are suddenly aware that they are free to enjoy themselves. As the charwoman leaves after her morning work, she giggles amiably as she informs the family, "Oh, you don't need to bother about how to get rid of the thing next door. It's been seen to. already. Then they all, three Zamzas, left the apartment together, which was more than they had done for months, and went by trolley into the open country outside the town. The trolley, in which they were the only passenger, was filled with warm sunshine. Leaning comfortably back in their seats, they canvassed their prospects for the future. While they were thus conversing, it struck both Zamzas almost at the same moment, as they became aware of their daughter's increasing vivacity, that in spite of all the sorrow of recent times, which had made her cheeks pale, she had bloomed into a buxom girl. They grew quieter and half unconsciously exchanged glances of complete agreement, having come to the conclusion that it would soon be time to find a good husband for her. And it was like a confirmation of their new dreams and excellent intentions that at the end of their journey, their daughter sprang to her feet and stretched her young body. From my point of view, any outstanding work of art is a fantasy insofar as it reflects the unique world of a unique individual. Art is not just simple arithmetic, it's a delicate calculus. Keep in mind the passion of the scientist and the precision of the artist. Now, have I made a mistake? Don't I mean the passion of the artist and the precision of the scientist? No. No. The passion of the scientist and the precision of the artist.
This program was made possible by a grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities.